So, Derek, during the last Nintendo Direct, Capcom announced a brand new port, and Capcom have been very good at supporting Switch 2 up until now. We've had like Resident Evil 7 and 8 and Requiem and Pragmata and Monster Hunter Stories 3. You know, they've been one of the best supporters so far, and they've just given us another game with Devil May Cry 5. This is the Devil Hunter Edition. And it is a pretty great port with a little surprise in there.
Oh.
But before we get into it, I did compare it against PlayStation 4, which is the last gen version. I thought it'd be the most fair to compare it to. And there's pros and cons against PlayStation 4. I think with most of the RE Engine games, they've kind of kept it uniform with Switch 2 in terms of how it looks. So if you've played Resident Evil Requiem or Pragmata, you get similar resolutions where you can see it's been DOSS'd up from a fairly low point, but it's definitely clearer than something like Pragmata. Mm-hmm. But I think it's pretty comparable to PlayStation 4, even if you can see like DOSS-y hair in some characters.
Yeah, but in a game like this, when it's so action heavy, you're almost not even paying attention to the hair. Like it's great details. It's a beautiful game at times, and it is my favorite of the Devil May Cries easily. So this is comparable enough that I'm like, this is minor. I've not actually upgraded to the PS5 version, so I've never played any of the Virgil content. So the Switch 2 version is kind of attractive in that way. It's just as a way to replay it and see how it all handles. And from looking at the screens that you have here, I'm barely noticing a difference.
Well, that's the thing, really. In the moment, it's really hard to tell. It's only really like when you zoom in and properly look. But like when you compare a Series S game to Switch 2, though, even though it's coming from maybe a lower resolution, the actual result doesn't always look like that. So as you can see, like with this monster here, the teeth in particular are actually a bit sharper on Switch 2. So even though some elements like hair may still have those lower res artifacts, it doesn't always come across as worse. In many cases, it's better. And a curiosity I've noticed as well is it's also just marginally brighter than PS4 in terms of the lighting. Mm-hmm. So if we get to a shot with Virgil's face, you might be able to see here there's a lot more darkness on the left side of his face on PS4. Whereas Switch 2 just shows it a little bit brighter. So that seems more like a lighting change than any kind of downgrade or upgrade.
Yeah, that seems like a conscious choice there. And honestly, one I don't mind in this case. Sometimes shadows are used to effect, but other times it just can come across as just a bit too dark. And by brightening it up a bit, you are able to see a bit more detail on what's around.
Now, I don't know if you remember how the PS4 version ran. This is PS4 here. In gameplay, it's pretty great. So let's go towards gameplay clip here where we're going to fairly close to 60, but not really locked. So it can hit 60, but in boss fights like this, you're going to be dipping from around 60 to 55 fairly frequently. Sometimes as low as 50, but for the most part, in general gameplay, it does reach 60. But in the cutscenes, it actually does not ever really. It's usually around 40, sometimes 30 FPS in the cutscenes. So I was curious how Switch 2 would run in the cutscenes in particular. And as you can see here in just general gameplay, we are locked at 60 basically the entire time on Switch 2. Here's a cutscene here, 60 frames per second the entire time. But if you go over here, like we're in the middle of combat, again, 60 frames per second. There's maybe minor dips on camera cuts every now and then, but for the most part, we are basically locked at 60.
There's barely any dip.
And if there is one, it's usually like just a frame or two. But what makes this a bit more interesting, and it's something I only realized when booting up the software, is the game goes from 60 Hz from the Switch 2 menu to 120 Hz, which Street Fighter 6 does as well. So I thought, okay, maybe it's just going to 120 FPS container for input lag, which is what Street Fighter 6 does. But that's actually not the case. It's actually unlocking the frame rate up to 120 frames per second, which was never advertised.
Oh. Looks like it's reaching a pretty consistent 90, too.
Yeah. Let me go to a scene like this one over here, where you're like a bit more outdoorsy, less going on. We're going over 100 frames per second. And this was a feature in the PS5 version. You can unlock the frame rate there. But there's no graphical options in the Switch 2 version. So if you've got 120 FPS enabled in the Switch 2 menu, it's going to try and reach that all the time. And the only way to turn that off is to turn that option off in the menu.
It's doing its best. It's doing its best. And yeah, this honestly seems like a pretty comparable version. Like there seems to be really no real downsides to it.
Not really. I will say with the higher frame rates, because Switch 2 doesn't have variable refresh rate, VRR, in docked, that does mean that it's never really even. So because handheld mode has it, it's actually a lot more even. But it's basically, your TV's at 120 hertz, but the game usually isn't. It's usually like around 80, 90. So you do get judder. And if there were VRR when docked, this would be perfect. Like, this would be really, really smooth.
Yeah.
But it's not quite perfect because there is no VRR when docked.
Okay. It seems like a pretty great version. John, you're tempting me because I love this game, and it's like I've never played the Virgil content, so it's like,
Yeah, you get the Virgil content here. One thing you don't get is legendary Dark Knight mode, and even remember what that is. That's basically they doubled the enemy counts to make things a bit more chaotic. That's been cut from Switch 2. That was only on PS5 and Series X. It wasn't on PS4 either.
Okay.
But
I can see that it's struggling a bit more. They're like, it's not going to look great. It's probably best for us not to do that, just to keep it within line, which, that's fine. I don't think that's a huge loss in terms of things.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a Frankenstein between PS4 and PS5, where you've got PS4 looking visuals, but it runs above 60 frames per second, whereas PS4 was often below 60 frames per second. So it gets that from PS5, but otherwise you get like a pretty nice looking version of the game. It's portable, and handheld mode looks pretty good. Definitely a little bit on the blurrier side at times, but it's still perfectly playable. And again, that goes above 60 frames per second as well, which is kind of nuts. And I don't think they ever said that this could go to 120 FPS.
No, I don't remember that being mentioned at all. So
yeah, that's a nice surprise.
Yeah, that's just nice to have. And honestly, Devil May Cry's fared very well on the Switch because the DMC3 is widely considered to be the best version there.
The only game missing from Switch now is Devil May Cry 4. But you're right, 3 is considered the best version. And with this one, you get some costumes, which other versions don't have. So there's an argument for this one being the best one, even though it's missing some modes. I think the only thing that would really make this perfect is if Nintendo put VRR in docked mode themselves, because that way it saves all the variable frames between 60 and 120.
Yeah.
That would be amazing, and there's still a chance they could do that, but there's been no word on that yet. But otherwise, you've got a fantastic version of Devil May Cry 5, and it's just another one of a great in the line of Capcom ports.
Yeah. Capcom sort of just has Switch 2 figured out, it seems. Like I'm trying to think of the last time they've had like a bad port to it, and it's just no.
Yeah, it's not really. They have like variable frame rates in general. Like both Pragmata and Resident Evil Requiem, they don't often hit 60 all the time. It's like capping them would be nice, but they're still like visually fantastic. And in Devil May Cry 5's case, you can have it locked at 60 if you want. You just turn off 120 FPS in the Switch 2's options. Like that locks it at 60. And it's a really good 60. There's sometimes, even when playing at 60, there are like minor dips in the cutscenes, but it's super, super rare. It's nothing like what PS4 was.
Yeah. That's a fair trade-off. That's easy to take care of. This is, if you have not experienced this game, it's great. It's great. So, absolutely worth picking up. Great to see that the frame rate is very stable. Game looks very comparable, if not better, at times than the PS4 version. I'm honestly impressed by all this, John.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot more left for Capcom to port now. It's just like Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, maybe Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster, and I don't know how many more candidates there are, really.
Devil May Cry 4, as we mentioned before. We'll have to see what they come out with next. There's the modern slate, they got most of it. I guess Monster Hunter.
Wilds has been confirmed. I guess it's too late for World, probably, but we've got the vast majority on lock now. Well, it's fair to say we're pretty impressed with Devil May Cry 5. Capcom just keep putting these things out, and they're delivering more often than not. So, Derek, thank you so much for joining me to look at Devil May Cry 5 on the Switch.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No worries at all, man. And hopefully we get even more. Hopefully Devil May Cry 6 just comes to Switch 2, which it probably will, going by all the other day-and-date games they've done.
Yeah, I think that's very likely.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.